So before this video starts, I did break this list up into tiers. And the main point of that is that some of these matchups are a little more subjective and I didn't want to give an objective answer. I can assert that some people would beat some people based on this reasoning. But the main point here is that if you disagree with the placement of a character in one tier and you think that somebody else in the same tier should beat them, that's fair. My main point is being that these tiers are more so like the part that's a little more clear cut. That's my main point. So enjoy the video, guys. What's going on, guys? TG or ThunderGod here, and today I'm going to be ranking the God of War characters slash bosses slash gods. It's a lot of slashes from weakest to strongest because I really like the series and I thought it'd be an interesting video. I'm only really going to be covering characters who are super relevant and actually shown in the series, as a lot of characters are talked about to be insanely powerful, but just not shown. For example, you have Morpheus, a primordial who can place all the gods and force them to sleep when Helios is taken out of the sky. But then we know Helios isn't as strong as some of the other gods and Morpheus isn't really shown. You understand my point. So I'll include some characters who are, relevant and powerful, but not everybody, like the Barbarian or the Kraken, because what am I going to do with that? Who really cares? With that being said, I will also be using information from the God of War 1 and God of War 2 novelization, as long as novelization from the most recent God of War novel. So in case you see any text pop up on screen, that is where the information comes from in terms of that, just to be quoted. Which is good because the novels actually extrapolate on a lot of the things the games don't necessarily brush up on. So they'll kind of fill in the gaps for us, in which case I will use that to talk about my answers. So that being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I worked really hard on it. Hopefully you enjoy it. It took a lot of work. I already said that. Man, stop rambling. Let's get into the video. Like and subscribe if you're new here. Man, let's go! The primordials were the first race of beings and deities that came into existence, predating the gods and even the titans. They were astronomical in size, and their appearance were elemental and cosmic in nature, similar to the titans, though they bore a more humanoid appearance than the titans. The infighting among the primordial race resulted in the creation of the world and the universe as we know it, as well as birthing several other deities, such as the Furies, the main antagonists of God of War Ascension. The vast majority of the race was killed off during and shortly after the war. After the end of the war, the remaining primordials went on to rule the universe until the Titans overthrew them. We actually do know the primordials themselves are, universal in strength, with the mere body of Uranus being what actually created the universe that God of War actually takes place in. Now, there's no real way to quantify which primordial is stronger than which, although you could make some assertions. For example, we see Ceto gaining the edge on Uranus in the opening of God of War Ascension, although this is rather a moot point, as we know Kronos is ultimately the one to defeat Uranus. It should be noted that Kronos is ultimately the one to defeat and overthrow Uranus. We actually do know that is the case from multiple sources. The main point here being is that the primordials all seem to be relative to one another, especially when we consider what senior writer of the series, Ariel Lawrence, states that they all had their own set of weaknesses and strengths that could be exploited and used, which would imply there isn't an astronomical gap in between the primordials to the point that one is unable to fight the other per se. So they should be relative enough or just comparable. So this tier out of all of them is really the most loose in general. So make what assertions you will, it just should be noted that anybody on this primordial tier should be able to defeat any other on this primordial tier. Now, Gaia is an extremely powerful titan in the God of War series, but in all honesty, aside from just being a powerful titan, she's relatively featless. Now, don't get me wrong, she's impressive enough to contend with Poseidon's sea avatar to a degree, but this was more so in assisting Kratos, who in all honesty was making up the difference here. But she is very powerful nonetheless. Now, aside from being able to combat, Poseidon's sea avatar, she also is shown getting dismantled and almost one-shot alongside Kratos from Zeus's Thunderbolt, a weapon that many gods actually do fear, as it is one of the most powerful attacks in the God of War series. But essentially, Gaia embodies the standard Titan arsenal, being very comparable to Titans like Perseus, who could damage gods like Helios greatly. So it also seems that a majority of Titans are relative to one another. I'm not going to go into each individual Titan. I'm just using Gaia as kind of the benchmark for the standard Titan arsenal. Now, Hermes is an interesting character in the God of War mythos. Being the speedster out of the gods of Olympus, Hermes actually does display some impressive feats for his speed. For example, being able to deliver all the souls to the underworld all at once. Now, to be entirely honest, Hermes isn't weak by any standard, but he does seem to be the rut of the litter in the Olympian hierarchy. He shows great inferiority to characters like Athena, someone who is also relatively featless, so it's a little harder to use her. But he also displays this in almost every interaction he has with other characters, such as other gods and the Sisters of Fate. To be honest, Hermes just doesn't do much to give him an edge on any of the other gods. On top of showing great inferiority to lower Olympians, he also simply lacks any substantial feats or showings. Not to say his speed isn't a great asset, but we've seen characters slower than him like Kratos. So it's not like his speed is the biggest component here, as a lot of the other gods are also way more hacksy as well. So his speed's actually unironically the weakest thing on this list, at least on the lower Olympian side. Athena is another one of those gods who doesn't display any radical feats of strength or power. We do know she is confident enough in her strength to actually threaten Hermes after he tries to take her virginity. Yeah, I'm on the same page with you on that one. But aside from that, we actually don't really have any crazy showings from her. Essentially, it's implied she's above Hermes, as everybody kind of is, but after that, there's no real way of knowing where she would be, so I can't really place her confidently higher on this list. Her transcending into a new plane of existence and knowledge after she dies is an impressive feat nonetheless, but we can't really use that again, as we're talking in a combat scenario, which that isn't really too relevant. Helios. Now, Helios, the god of the sun, is an extremely powerful character and important to the God of War lore. Now, Helios is actually shown to be pretty impressive, actually being able to drive back the primordial Nyx from the sky every day. We know this to be the case from the God of War Ascension multiplayer, as evidenced here.
On the edge of the Aegean, where the great god Helios banishes Nyx from the night sky, an epic battle rages within the great walled city of Troy.
Now, we know Nyx herself actually participated in the war with the other primordials and should be comparable to her father again, so Helios being above this tier shouldn't really be any surprises. Now, Helios generally should be more impressive than Hermes for the simple fact that, again, Hermes displays great inferiority to a lot of other characters, but there also is the argument of, for example, Hermes dodging Helios's light beam in the fight, as he's actually able to do that, but there's nothing to say that the head of Helios would really be indicative of his actual full capabilities. For all we know, he could have attacks faster or far more potent than his simple beams of light that don't even really attack, they just blind. So I would make the argument this wouldn't be indicative of Helios at his full strength. A side point to add on to this, in the God of War Ascension multiplayer, there is a scene in which they discuss the mightiest gods of Olympus, and there's actually a missing staircase or missing god, in which case, after looking through the files, it does appear to be Helios, as the individual is holding a shield similar to Helios. So if that was actually the case, Helios would be much higher on this list, but because obviously it wasn't implemented into the game fully and not fully implemented into the lore, I can't really place him higher on this list for that reason. Atlas. Now, Atlas is another one of those characters who's not only very important to the God of War lore, but arguably one of the strongest titans as well. For starters, we can put Atlas above Hermes based off the fact that he was actually able to drag Helios from the sky in God of War Chains of Olympus, and with his power break the pillar of the world. Helios himself actually references how Kratos saved him from Atlas. But on top of dragging Helios from the sky and capturing him, he actually displays strength comparable to that of Kronos, being able to blow back a younger and weaker Hades while contending in strength with Hades in a chain tug of war, just like Kronos actually did. They both perform similar feats essentially. Atlas then gets his soul snatched, leading into the next appearance in Chains of Olympus. Atlas even performs a feat similar to that of Hyperion, the titan that embodied the sun before Helios, in which he holds up the weight of the heavens or the world, similar to the description of the spear of Hyperion. Atlas doing this for decades with no fatigue is very impressive, even by general titan standards. So we know Atlas is actually an extremely impressive individual, being able to combat the higher tier of Olympians, as well as being remarkable even by titan standards, which is kind of why he's so high on this tier really. Kronos. Now, we actually know that Kronos was ultimately the one to defeat Uranus in a battle. On a cosmic scale, we have multiple confirmations that a fight actually took place between Kronos and his father, the primordial Uranus, from which we can confidently say that Kronos would be stronger than this Uranus, simply putting him in the next tier over, being the Titan tier. We know that Kronos brings with him the creation of time itself, making him very powerful, with strength very comparable to Atlas. However, generally in the God of War lore, Kronos is regarded as the strongest Titan. This can be seen from his leading of the Titans in the Great War, but even more so after Poseidon defeats the Titan Oceanus. Zeus notes the Titan is nothing compared to other Titans, unlike Kronos, implying Kronos is somewhat of a top dog with his feats previously discussed supporting this. Kronos is essentially Atlas, but with far more magic involved in play. So taking this into account, he should bare minimum be on the level of Atlas or above based on his feats and lore. You can decide obviously which one you want to put first. This is just my take on it. Atropos and Lachesis. Next we have the Sisters of Fate. These are probably some of the weirder characters to talk about in this list, since their power is respected greatly by Olympians and Titans, even being the reasons the Titan lost the war. The problem is that their power is so renowned because of the fact that they're able to manipulate the threads of fate for mortals, Titans, and gods alike, which is extremely impressive but isn't fully representative in a combat sense where they would simply fight somebody without, threading their destiny. In which case, we see the sisters actually intimidate Hermes greatly in God of War 2 novelization, going as far to think nothing of him. However, this again is hard to use since it could be in reference to their ability to manipulate fate, in which case they display the showings of contending with a much stronger Kratos towards the end of God of War 2. We know Kratos has been getting astronomically stronger throughout his journey to the Fates. Take, for example, the Rage of Kronos ability, which Kratos notes to improve all his stats greatly on top of being an ability he can use. In which case, I'd make the argument these sisters contending with this much stronger Kratos would earn them a spot on the mid-Olympian tier, especially considering Kratos was actually able to combat Atlas in the God of War Chains of Olympus game using the Gauntlet of Zeus. Kratos was actually able to pretty much chain and nail Atlas to hold up the world, a greater penance than Zeus himself almost placed on the Titans. But this is a much weaker Kratos, of course, as well. So you kind of get this sense that Kratos is like kind of an animal. And I don't want to sit here and try and quantify how much effort he's putting into each fight, because I am doing that to a minor degree. It just should be noted that the Sisters of Fate are combating a much stronger Kratos here. Especially if you go off the fight, it does seem to be a very back and forth confrontation. That's the way I'll put it. Since the sisters are combating a much stronger Kratos when a much weaker Kratos is combating an individual capable of already being able to contend with other Olympians, which is more so just a testament to how powerful Kratos is in general. Ares. Now, Ares is an extremely impressive character in the God of War mythos, despite being the final boss in God of War 1. Right off the bat, we can get a sense that Ares is among the higher echelon of Olympians from the God of War multiplayer when he appears as one of the mightiest gods of Olympus.
Behold, the mightiest gods of Olympus. Choose wisely, for the path you take will be the first important step in your quest.
Next to Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. We also know the God of War Ascension multiplayer was outright stated to be in line with the actual God of War lore, including their weapons. Along with this, we know that Kratos needed Pandora's box to even combat Ares on a somewhat even playing field, and even then it could be argued he'd have lost that encounter if not for the gods assisting him. With Ares even goading Zeus to use his legendary Thunderbolt that so many other gods feared, and him showing great confidence in areas many gods do not, Ares was contending with a Kratos that was previously established to being able to somewhat combat the Titans. It should be no surprise that Ares' lore and feats be this high on the totem pole, requiring Kratos to essentially absorb the power of a god to even combat him, which, I mean, is really impressive as we've seen Kratos run through many, many gods. Now we're moving on to the high Olympian tier. Now, you might be asking why Ares isn't in this tier, and besides the obvious lack of feats compared to Poseidon and Hades, we actually do know that the big three in God of War do reign supreme compared to the rest of the gods of Olympus in terms of strength. It can also be argued that although Ares is one of the mightiest gods of Olympus via God of War Ascension, that would be more so in relativity to everybody else and doesn't inherently mean he's more comparable to the big three. An analogy that can be used to explain this would be that you have 4 runners said to be the fastest in the class, but the top 3 runners are way faster than the 4th. The fourth just happens to be faster than everybody else. That's Ares. He's just far superior to everybody else. But the big three, which were previously stated to be at the top of the totem pole, happen to be a peg above Ares.
You challenge me, mortal? A god of Olympus?
Now, Poseidon and Hades are shown to be extremely powerful in the God of War universe, being shown far weaker and earlier in their lives to be able to take on Kronos and Atlas very confidently, which is just a small display of their strength. We do know both of these combatants are extremely comparable, especially when we look at the fact that they are both very confident when the prospect of fighting each other came about. So it's actually a little more subjective who would take the lead at this point, as they display very similar lore and are very comparable in that lore. I would make the assertion that Hades would be above Poseidon, if not for the fact they actually get stronger from each soul he absorbs, and we actually know he absorbed the souls of titans like Atlas, along with his claws being an extremely hacks ability. In all honesty, compared to Poseidon, who uses, water or, the rage of Poseidon, perhaps you could make the argument the location could make the difference here for Poseidon, but I personally find Hades' hacks far more impressive when stacked up to Poseidon. But these two are very close in strength, so if you want to put one over the other, that's completely fine, as it's more subjective. It also should be noted that Poseidon, as time progresses, would also logically get stronger. We just know that, for example, if Poseidon and Hades progressed at the same rate, Hades would also get buffed from each soul he absorbs, which you do know to be the case from his boss fight in God of War 3. Simply put, these two are very interchangeable, very powerful, eclipsing most of the other gods, if not all of them. Well, not all of them, because you know who's going to be above them. But simply put, they are at the top. They are top dogs. That's pretty much all I can say on that. Now, Zeus is very powerful, like to no one's surprise, and it really shouldn't surprise anybody that have Zeus this high on the list. Now, Zeus claims the #1 spot on the Olympian hierarchy. Now, this is pretty self-explanatory, especially when we consider Zeus was powerful enough to combat Kratos very evenly without the power of hope, or, Zeus's fear avatar being involved. His thunderbolt is also something every Olympian fears, including his two brothers, Hades and Poseidon, who also submit to Zeus when the prospect of battling or angering him comes into play. Zeus is so powerful, in fact, that while wielding the Blade of Olympus, he thought he could actually one-shot Hades with zero difficulty. And Zeus wielding the Blade of Olympus is no small feat, as even one slash from the Blade of Olympus ended the Great War, which went on for hundreds of years. So, depending on who wields the Blade of Olympus is an astronomical growth in power. And this same Zeus, right, who's relative enough to Kratos, gets stabbed by Kratos using the same Blade of Olympus, actually arguably a much stronger Blade of Olympus because it absorbs the god power from Athena and Zeus himself in the boss fight. So he actually gets stabbed by a arguably stronger Blade of Olympus, in which case, it should be pretty clear that he's just a notch above a lot of characters in the God of War universe, as he's seen just taking it up to be honest. So moving on from there, defeating Gaia in God of War 3, almost one-shotting her and showing complete dominance over the Greek pantheon in terms of strength. Even without the Blade of Olympus, Zeus is just an absolute animal. His feats speak for themselves. He's able to combat a Kratos far stronger than the one that defeated all the other gods, so that shouldn't be too questionable. His Thunderbolt has an extremely powerful lore, very powerful lore. He is the strongest on Olympus, eclipsing the Greek pantheon and Titans completely. And this makes sense, obviously, as the Zeus that did fight the Titans was a much younger and weaker Zeus, as gods get much stronger over time.
Throw whatever you have at me. I'll keep coming. That old body will give out. But before I end this, I want you to know one thing. I can't feel any of this.
Now, you might be questioning why I have the Norse pantheon above the Greek pantheon. Allow me to explain. I touched on this slightly in my Baldur vs. Zeus video, but I will go more in depth with it here. Essentially, Baldur was stated by Kratos to have powers essentially surpassing anything Kratos has fought before, which in fairness is most likely in reference to his invulnerability. The issue is Baldur is also quoted to have raw strength superior to Kratos throughout their fight, pressuring Kratos many times. Baldur goes as far as to making such an impression on Kratos that Kratos believes he is simply a monster, going as far as to rack his brain as to some god ability of his that could actually defeat Baldur. The same guy with no hesitation scaled Mount Olympus is trying to figure out a way to defeat Baldur. Now, I know what you're going to say next too. Kratos is rusty and suppressing himself due to Atreus. On the point of Kratos being rusty, we actually do have confirmation from Cory Barlog himself that old Kratos is actually superior to his Olympus era counterpart. This is most likely referring to end of God of War Kratos without the power of hope, which makes sense since A, gods get stronger over time, but B, Kratos would still have a sliver of that power, so we know Kratos is confidently above his prime counterpart, so that rusty part is kind of out of the way. What about Atreus? Now, the statements Kratos makes on Baldur, it shouldn't really be relevant if Atreus is there or not, because he is making a note of his opponent's strength. The only argument I could see for arguing like Atreus being there is that Kratos isn't able to like destroy the field around him and has to redirect the fight. It would simply be his assessment of Baldur. Atreus actually isn't present in the fight against Baldur either until the end of the game, in which Atreus is actually noted to be getting exponentially stronger after he learned about his godlyhood. So Atreus actually grew from his learning about his true identity almost, so that would answer the question as well, as Atreus actually does get astronomically stronger throughout the game. To no surprise, it's almost like he gets over a mental barrier, which a lot of people have. In real life, that's a big thing. The mental state of an individual can greatly affect their physical limitations and prowess, I guess you could say. But with all this evidence, whether you look at Kratos being stronger than his actual quote-unquote prime in Greek, or Kratos' own assessment of Baldur's power, it should be pretty clear that the Norse pantheon of warriors is a notch above the Greek pantheon of rulers.
My vengeance ends now.
Kratos, the ghost of Sparta, the fist of Ares, the slave of Olympus, the god of war, Kratos. The man who single-handedly dismantled the Greek pantheon, haunted by his past, but now looking forward to his future. No one is surprised by his placement here. We have Kratos growing in strength always. I'm certain he's actually going to grow far more in God of War Ragnarok, so it's safe to say we haven't seen his true limits and how far his power really has gone. And I didn't want to go through and put his various forms at certain points on this list, as it would just be ultra tedious and nobody really would want to see that. So we have Kratos at the top, which really shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, considering how we fared far better against a far more motivated Baldur, who actually found euphoric pleasure in fighting Kratos in their finale. So you can actually make the argument he's trying much harder, I suppose. Kratos is really getting stronger always, which is why he's at the top. I don't really think that needs to be much of a discussion, you know, his astronomical growth throughout the games. You could still hold the notion, actually, that Baldur is above Kratos at this point, since it did somewhat require Atreus to support Baldur in their final fight. But also, you could imply Kratos isn't trying to kill Baldur due to Freya's sake, so it could be either or. We don't really know. If you want to hold Baldur over Kratos, that's still a fine notion to have. I'm just putting Kratos over Baldur due to my own personal opinion. But that is going to be the list. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed the video, please make sure to like. I would really appreciate it. I actually had to put some down cash to get those novels, but you know, it is what it is. I love what I do. And definitely make sure to subscribe if you're new here. I would appreciate it. I'm always doing stuff like this, moving towards bigger and more interesting projects. So definitely let me know. I would appreciate the support. I appreciate you watching. I really enjoyed making this video. Enough with that sob shit. Man, you guys have a good one. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.